Hello, everybody. My name is Markos Moulitsas. I'm here with Kerry Eleveld. This is our weekly show about politics. Daily Kos, this is the brief. Kerry is being very safe, masked up. I think you're socially distant. I don't see anybody around you.
I am. I'm socially distanced. I'm masked. I'm super protected. So everybody stay on it. Stay on it because we're hitting a critical period here.
So thanks, everybody, for joining us this week. We're going to have a great show. We're going to have Jayne Parish. She is an organizer down in Navajo Nation in Arizona. She's going to talk about how her community helped deliver Arizona for the Democrats, both for Joe Biden and to pick up a Senate seat in that state. We're also going to talk to Daily Kos' Lauren Floyd. She is a Georgia resident. She is on the ground in Georgia. She's going to tell us what she's seeing, what she's hearing about as we fight for the runoff elections this January. So, Kerry, speaking of Georgia, Stacey Abrams just yesterday, I think it was yesterday, announced that 750,000 people had already requested ballots. I mean, the election's not till early January, and here we are in late November. Almost 1 million people have requested ballots. It seems like energy is really high for this special election, correct?
Well, yeah, but you've written about this, right? So let me ask you a couple questions. I'll turn the table, right? So am I right that that's above what happened in the general election, or where are we in terms of being on pace with how many absentee ballots were requested?
So this is the impossible question to answer, actually, and the reason is because we've never had an election that was so vote by mail heavy as it is now, right? So the big question that everybody sort of, or not the big question, but the big factor I keep calling it the special election, it's a runoff election. The big factor in a runoff election is which party suffers the least amount of drop off.
Right.
The assumption is presidential election will draw more people to the polls than any other election, period. And particularly one that just shattered all records. So the question is, if the Democrats got as many votes as Joe Biden, we win. I mean, I'm pretty sure that Donald Trump maxed out his potential base of support, right? So the question then is, who is going to suffer the least amount of drop off? And so this is the wild card. So 750,000 vote by mail requests is actually very it's encouraging. One, because Democrats dramatically outperformed in vote by mail by a 2-to-1 margin. So we can assume that the majority of those votes are going to be Democratic votes. Republicans placed their entire bet basically on election day. So that's number one. Number two, I think that's going to be even more exaggerated this runoff election because Republicans have been demonizing that vote by mail. And they've been claiming that it's somehow illegitimate or fraudulent that people vote by mail. And you throw in a little bit of that anger that they lost the election and they're casting out for excuses, a big, handy, easy excuses. Democrats cheated with vote by mail. So I would assume that the bulk of that is Democratic votes. Now we need to get to around 2.2 million. That's what Joe Biden got.
Do you think that bodes particularly well for the youth vote? I feel like maybe I saw it somehow connected to youth voting that it could help. I'm not sure, but did I see you write about that, or am I just making that up?
I've been writing about the youth vote and just how dramatic that youth vote was. I mean, it was up, I think, almost double. Now, when you have an election that you win by so little, and Joe Biden won Georgia by about 10,000 votes, when the margin is that slight, everybody was the reason you won, right? So the Latino vote, it's small in Georgia. It's the reason that Joe Biden won. Definitely the Black vote, definitely the youth vote, the Asian American vote. I mean, everybody had a piece in winning that. So obviously, we need to keep that youth vote engaged. And there's a sort of second particular interest in that is that in political science world, it's assumed, and maybe there's research behind it, but the assumption is that once somebody votes twice, they're voters for life.
Yeah.
So if we can get these young voters that voted for the first time, if we can get them they voted already in November, if we can get them to turn out and vote again here in January, that really looks great moving forward as we work towards making Georgia we don't want it to be a battleground state. I mean, we're happy that it is. We want it to be a safe blue state like Virginia or Colorado, states that used to be red states that then turn into battlegrounds and are now safely Democratic.
me just add something in, as long as we're on youth vote and young voters of color, because I wrote up the other day this research from the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning at Tufts University. They're sort of the preeminent like youth voter type think tank, right? And they do lots of analysis. And they said they looked at Georgia in particular. Well, they looked at overall, right, the election and young voters, but also Georgia and Arizona in particular. They say young people, especially youth of colors, were critical to the Biden-Harris victory in key battleground states like Georgia, Arizona, where Black and Latino youth may have single-handedly made Biden competitive. And let me just add some numbers in here. In Georgia, which Biden won, I think, by a little over 13,000 votes now is what it came down to. An estimated 188,000 more young voters backed Biden than chose President Trump. And notably, the margin came overwhelmingly from young voters of color. 90% of Black youth supported Biden in Georgia, while 62% of young white voters supported Trump. So if you think about basically 13,000 plus voter margin, right?
Yeah.
And then young voters provided an extra 188,000 votes for the Biden-Harris ticket. I mean, that's the difference right there, right? I mean, you can do this for a lot of different groups, but those were critical votes.
You need every single one of those. Here's my favorite stat of the election. I've been repeating this over and over and over again. Donald Trump won Georgia by 5 points in 2016. On top of that, he added 360,000 new votes. That's 15% more than he got in 2016. So he wins by 5. He increases his vote total by 15%, 365,000, and he loses. And he still loses because the Democrats and Joe Biden added 590 and change thousand new votes, almost 600,000 new votes in 4 years. How is that possible?
Right.
And you look at all these sort of organizers, right? Everybody gives Stacey Abrams credit, and she's freaking amazing, and she deserves a lot of the credit. But there were myriad organizations on the ground organizing, not just the Black community, but the Latino community, the Asian American community. These are not large communities relative to the state. But when you have these sort of margins where you're winning by 10,000 votes, and yet every single one of those votes counts. And if I had to guess, the January runoff will be just as close. We're going to need every single one of those votes to come back out.
Just real quick, let's back up and just look at the broader picture too, because while we're focusing on trying to get, voters out for the Democratic Party and youth voters in particular, what's happening on the Republican side is a total shit show, excuse my French. Like, it is a disaster. It is a spectacular meltdown that we couldn't have possibly, asked more from, right? Where you have now, Donald Trump has been declared a loser, 3 times now, and he's asking for another recount, right? So, and the two Republican senators, Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, are on record backing Trump's, bid to overturn the election, and also saying, there was a bunch of fraud. I know Republicans run the state, but there's a bunch of fraud in the election. Yeah. And now they're in the position of asking, people to go back and put their faith in that system again that they say was fraudulent and stole their votes, and the voting machines and blah blah blah, all these conspiracy theories. And then you've got this right-wing contingent, which I know you've been paying attention to too, where they are, they've got a hashtag now. What is it? Write in Trump for GA, right? Hashtag write in Trump for GA. And they're encouraging their people. They're like, the best way to teach the establishment Republicans a lesson is to write Trump in, and then if he's not going to be president, then we don't care about the rest of it. And and then you have Donald Trump Jr. saying, hey, on the one hand saying there's been massive fraud everywhere. I can't even imitate that guy. I don't know how over the top his appeals have been on how much voter fraud there has. Yeah. But then he sends out this tweet and says, anyone who's thinking of not voting, in the upcoming Senate election, ignore it. You have to get out and vote. Like, you must vote. And so, like they have created a just sort of disastrous climate if they're trying to get every one of the voters who turned out, which was what we're talking about in the general, for these January primaries.
Yeah, when the margins are this tight, even a few percentage points here or there could mean the difference. I mean, I've been spending a lot of time in right-wing conservative sites, and they think that Governor Kemp, who's like the Trumpiest of Trumpy governors, they think he's a sellout, that he stole the election for Kelly Loeffler instead of Doug Collins, who was running in that jungle primary, arch conservative. I mean, they're all really at each other's throats. So this is definitely something we should, I think we're going to have a real opportunity to talk about it, maybe make a whole show around that in the coming weeks. But right now, I think it's time to bring our first guest. She is Jayne Parish. She is a organizer in Navajo Nation. And these people did incredible work this last election with not a lot of support. And they, again, close election in Arizona, provided the margin of victory. So Jayne, thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor and pleasure to have you on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here to meet you and speak with you all about what our team did and how everybody worked together.
So tell us, that's a really good place to start. Tell us some of the numbers that you saw in your area of responsibility, Navajo Nation, and how those numbers compare to the Democratic margin of victory in just here, this last election.
Sure. Well, there's a couple different numbers we've received from our numbers cruncher. His name's Keith, and he's a volunteer. But one of the biggest things that we were noticing, even after the first couple of days when the counties were coming in, there's a story that I love in the past history that our counties, which cover 5 of them, Navajo, Coconino, Apache County, which is northeastern, predominantly Navajo, but there's Hopi and Apache in those areas now. And then we've also taken on this year Gila and Graham. But really, the story goes, wait for the Navajo vote to come in. That was the story for many years, even when Napolitano was governor, and even when other folks were coming in, it was wait for the Navajo vote. And that's what I kept in my head when election night was happening. And so we have a broad area to cover and a many number of tribes, but the CD1, Congressional District 1, has the most tribal nations and communities than any other district in the country. And so all of these tribes, we have our precincts that we kept our eye on. So really, for example, today we had a number thrown at us, about 17,000 votes was also a big difference in some of our communities in terms of voter turnout. And in Navajo County, for example, that's the county we're working on, but we lost that by 2,000. But the tribal precincts, which is separate from the predominantly white conservative Republican areas, those went anywhere from 60, 70, 80% for Biden and Harris. So that's kind of what some of these numbers were coming out when people were saying, 80, 90%, they were specifically talking about our precincts. So that's kind of also comparison within the county as well. So other numbers, for example, we have is like on San Carlos and White Mountain Apache, Biden earned almost 85% of the vote in the presidential election. And in San Carlos Apache precinct in Gila County, Biden's 1,265 votes showed a really big increase over Clinton's in 2016. So we were also comparing the numbers from 16, from where Biden was, from where Clinton was at that time. And so we have that for each of them. At Hopi, for example, that's just a phenomenal story where our Hopi team really has changed the culture, we are saying, around voting, because for a lot of public communities, they very much stay within their communities. And so there's always sometimes some divide about how much do we go outside state and federal. But this year, the team just worked so hard along with other groups to really get voter registration up, and it's the most it's ever been. So a lot of our Democratic number areas were really reflective of national, where it was increased early voting, increased vote by mail, and increased voter registration. But those are just a few. We have more on our website specifically for specific communities like Momkopi and Hopi, or Kayenta area in one of our precincts. So we get really specific in our communities, because that, when the state and other groups say, oh, that's just a big county, we have to get even more local than that, so our folks know who and where they are. Where's our town? What's our precinct? Things like that. So
I guess this is a question for that could be applied to almost any non-voting group. But what took so long? Why was this not happening before this election, and what changed?
Well, I think it was happening in pieces, and I was listening again to your show about Georgia last time, and it was groups possibly doing things on their own, but we're trying to work better as a collective unit. So, for example, when I came on board early summer, late spring, I saw that disconnect years ago, how it was like there's the nonpartisan groups over here. I really didn't know about the Democratic Party groups, and that was always a challenge for communities of color, right? We're kind of left to our own vices until like maybe the last month or maybe two when the party might come in, but they're not there all year round or for the long haul. And so you do have little enclaves that do the work year round, but they're not all together. So in Arizona, we have 22 tribes. And so this group that I'm working with is a combination, a collective effort between Navajo County Democrats. They're kind of the lead in a lot of respects with fundraising. And then you have Apache County Democrats, Coconino County Democrats, and then now, of course, we're working in Gila and Graham. And we also threw in Maricopa County, because we know Native voters in Maricopa County in the Phoenix area were not being paid attention to enough. And so we had an organizer and her family help us triple the vote, because there's a lot of Navajo and Hopi and Apache people in the Valley that are in both our counties and here, and they go back and forth. So we kind of knew this all for the years, and like I said, we just kind of helped formalize it a little more. And really, it comes down to communication. I mean, our groups a year ago were doing things like Dems Give Back event before the pandemic to get that interest back, utilizing local leaders. And it was just that constant communication with all of the parties invested that could be partisan. Of course, you have to be careful with our nonpartisan partners, but it was having weekly meetings. It was, what are you doing? What can we do to support you? And it was Navajo County really lifting the fundraising effort, because each of the counties have to do their own fundraising. They don't get money from anywhere else. And so as people like Eric Kramer, who's been a member of Daily Coast Community since 2006, who was writing about the potential of Arizona Native votes, and he was like, this is what we can build. And then I came on board later, and more people started coming on board later, but it was defining an infrastructure for our group. And then, of course, paying attention to the other groups that in Arizona. And because we didn't do a lot of work with Southern Arizona, of course, that's changed now that we have more time. We're like, oh, hey, Tanahatam, what are you guys doing now? Let's work together better and plan for the next year and the year after. So I think it was there again, but not together. And so this year, with the unifying effort and the excitement and what we've been able to do collectively has just energized people. And we're not stopping at election day. Like some groups, they're gone after election day, but nope, we're here. So we're going to continue to grow.
Yeah, let me just jump in. It's fascinating stuff. Markos circulated something, and maybe he can retweet this after the show for people who are interested, but showing the overlap of where the tribes are in Arizona and where voted Democratic, right? And it's like almost an exact overlay of where the tribes are and where the Democratic, which counties, which areas went. So after the show, Markos can tweet that for anyone who wants to go to look at his Twitter feed at Markos, right? It's at Markos. But one thing I wanted to ask you is, you guys put a lot of effort into this. I actually have two questions, so I'm just going to throw them both out there, and you can pick and choose and whatever. One is, and this is kind of just a gut instinct, and I wonder if it's true. You're talking about the communication and the increase in communication, and a piece of me wonders if this strange COVID atmosphere somehow contributed to people not doing things the way they always normally do them, and needing to communicate because you couldn't just like show up somewhere and say hi to a few of your buddies or whatever. I just wonder if that sort of forced like some innovation that actually worked to your benefit. My second question would be, and this really comes also from a YouTube questioner who wonders in 2021 what you guys are looking for. And I always wonder with certain constituencies, because I used to report on the LGBTQ community, like what their earliest priority or priorities are. So it's those are two like completely disjointed questions, but I thought I'd get them out there.
No, those are great. So for the first one about the innovation, it was just a combination of things because so we have 30, we started out with about 20, 15 organizers initially, and then we started hiring to 20, 25, and 30. And then most of those organizers were paid by Daily Coast donors, so we could pay them a living. We didn't want them to not go without, but we also supported their efforts. We paid for their internet, if they had a phone bill, if they had needed copies, if anything that they needed, gas, fuel, because Navajo and Hopi and Apache are large places to travel.
I was going to say 30 people, it's like 3 times the size of Massachusetts, right? I mean,
yeah. So even though our team, it wasn't big enough. And that's where the other groups came in, like from the Apache County Democrats or like the nonpartisan groups were also doing their work, but it was being aware of each other's moves and finding out what was happening. So if the nonpartisan groups were holding something, hey, push our people over there so they can do stuff, or if we're doing something, the same thing. And so I think the innovation has always been there because we don't have great internet service, first of all, and everyone's go to iwillvote.com, go to I-this-and-that.com, and it was like, that's not going to work for a lot of our people. So that was for a few of our folks. But we really had to just go back to old school organizing and old school communication, which was somewhat one-on-one at a distance. We had people like Joanne Peshakai in my community who worked with elders years previously to register them, and she knew them. And so she would just go down the list and call, but if they weren't answering, she could drive up at a distance and remain in her truck or wherever it was, keeping that distance, and talk to them in Navajo and be like, what do you need help with? And she could sit there and write and do it with them or for them. You actually had people that, for example, needed signs in the really remote part of Navajo near the Four Corners. And instead of them coming all the way to Flagstaff to pick up supplies, it's calling one another, who can drop this off, who can do this. So you're utilizing that communication network in that way. And then of course it was like things as simple as, okay, we can't reach people by phone. We got radio covered. We got the newspapers covered. We can't go door to door as much as we want, but we can leave stuff at the door and then maybe pick it up later. And that worked really great in some Hopi communities where nobody from the outside was allowed to go in. And so our Hopi organizers really had to know their community and work with the people there to do things.
Because of COVID, right? I mean,
COVID. Yeah. I mean, so it's partly innovation, but also we have to go back instead of just relying on the internet or maybe in some cases the phone and technology. Is you really had to utilize and keep up. And I think people were really more motivated because a lot of our voters, more Native voters, are predominantly Democratic. And so they were pissed. A lot of them were mad from what they were seeing, and that just wanting to get Trump out was a huge motivating factor. Yeah. And Biden was there, but we had a lot of people that were, excited about other candidates, but they said, okay, this is the guy we got to go with, and we're gonna support him. And so it's not like we're all gonna dump off and say, no, we're gonna go Republican, or no, we're not gonna vote. I mean, yeah, we had a couple of those, but really, I think it was the energy and the motivation to get them out. That was a really big thing because they saw what COVID was doing. They saw the inefficacies and how they were working with tribes and what was not being delivered. And it just, it was just great to hear that from the ground from people that we were talking to.
So one of the things that has really frustrated me about this election cycle is the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been wasted on TV ads. And they run for 30 seconds, it's gone. They didn't change anybody's mind. The one state where Trump outspent Biden on the air was Georgia. So we can see how useful this was. On the other hand, we're talking, groups like yours are so starved for financial resources, and they actually reach individuals and they get out what is a natural Democratic base that is non-voting. And from what I read, Daily Coast raised, I think, $300,000 for your efforts, and then another $150,000 from Crooked Media and a Swing Left chapter. So we're talking $450,000, and you were able to accomplish so much, right? So how frustrating is it to see so much money spent on those TV ads and very little of it? I mean, did any of the campaigns write you checks? Did any of that money trickle down to you guys?
We didn't get any direct campaign contributions, but they did come in on their own, like the last month or two, to do things like radio ads and newspaper ads and things like that. But our groups directly, we didn't get that financial support. So they were doing it on their own. And it was just trying to coordinate. Well, if you're going to call this group of community, make sure that we know, so we're not like, doing it like 5 times a day. It was coordination, so that was really helpful. The Arizona Democratic Party is going through a reorganization right now, but I know a lot of tribal leadership have spoken to me and Debbie Nesmanuel, who's the DNC committee representative, that they have been really struggling to try to change that perception of how they work with tribes and to really invest for a long time. And so we had a quick debrief, and the current chair really agreed with a lot of what we said, but it takes to have to remind them and keep them accountable even after, I love Ann Heitland, who's the chair of the Coconino County. She tweeted something like, okay, but you can't come in the last month or two and then do all this investment and then go away. That's not how you win these elections. And I'm like, go Ann. I was like, that's exactly what happened when we see money trickling down. If it's millions of dollars, it's like, where is this going? When this was our philosophy. All right, we knew COVID was hitting hard. And I love that our team switched that into March. They knew COVID was hitting hard, and they did what community organizing does: get people water, get people help with their mail, get people PPE, get people food. I mean, we had folks drive hours to coordinate food drop-offs. And we didn't say, oh, this is from the Democrats. We wanted to, but we were like, no, we can't do this with food. It's important. And so they were doing that for a long time. I mean, our 15 organizers, Jonathan Yazzie and Luke, and he was helping elders with hay and make sure they have propane. So they did this for a month to help with that. And then it was time it just didn't feel right to try to talk about voting and register to vote right then when we had to deal with immediate needs. But when primaries started coming up, then we started switching. Okay, this is where we need to go. And so we went back into campaign mode. And it was really putting voters first from the very beginning, of putting voters and organizers first. Yeah, we have candidates. They're important. But it's about the people in our community, because candidates will come and go, but our people are going to be here for a long time. And so I love that we ran a humane campaign that way, which was very different, because we didn't want to, hurt or hinder our organizers. I mean, they know their communities best, and we're not going to kill them with you have to make 1,000 calls by 5 o'clock today. No, they have lives, they have things. So we ran our campaigns very differently, with them in mind, with our voters in mind. And I think that was really what drove a lot of this. And so paying our people, they have no jobs. Some of them got laid off, some of them because of COVID. You had a lot of folks hurting. And it's like, what we could do is at least we can pay them to do this part-time or full-time if they're able to. And that's what we kept telling people. You want to put money in a campaign, pay people locally to do the job, and they are more than willing, and they will put all of their energy and heart into it. I mean, it kind of goes back to the concept of like the privileged people on campaigns, or the privileged people that can run for you have people that volunteer. I'm sorry, I could never volunteer because I had no parents or anybody paying for my bills while I volunteered on a campaign. I had to get paid. And so that's the concept that we ran as well. So it's really exciting.
Don't leave without telling us what a couple of your priorities are for the incoming Biden administration.
Yeah.
We'll take it real quick.
Well, I wanted to go back to some of the priorities. I didn't answer the second question. Really what we're doing in the next stages, which translates to the policy pieces, is we know that the Democratic Party needs work. We're great to work with them. Of course, we're going to be here. We're going to be Democrats. Like I said, we're not going to switch over.
You mean the National Democratic Party?
Yeah. Right, official Democrat, and the Arizona Democratic Party, and our county parties.
Okay.
And it's all like building out in these big circles. Yeah. And so we know we have to do the work, and we want them to listen to us. So part of that is organizing like our Native American Caucus group in Arizona to make it stronger. But really, we're recruiting precinct committee members right now for our counties, because we really relied on our precinct committee people to help us do the work. At the White Mountain Apache County, or White Mountain Dems, for example, volunteered and did so many phone calls and postcards, and everybody just pitched in, from volunteers locally and nationally. And so we need more PCs in Navajo County, for example. We have X many number of seats to fill before this deadline. So we need to start building before the next round. And so that's what we're doing, is building and structuring our organization so that we have now a 501c4 and a 5. And how are we then going to bring in our organizers? Because what we don't like is not being able to pay them. And like we said, we are not going to bring you on and then just cut you off on election day. And unfortunately, we've had to cut back because we have to reassess our financial efforts and how we're going to continue to keep this going and raise money. But that's like where we are, is really building locally so that our organizers that were new, and even those that have been on, they are the heart and soul of they are the heart and soul of this team, because every one of them, 30 of them, their stories are so powerful in what they did to get the work done, how they relied on each other, how they communicated with their families, with us. And they had family members die, and they've lost loved ones, but man, their stories are powerful. And so we are going to take care of our organizers. Excuse me.
No, I feel really honored that the De La Coast community was a big part of that. And there's two things that really stood out that I really love. And one is the party as a social services organization. It's more than just coming in, swooping in at the last minute. It's being present in people's lives and actually making a difference, so that, casting a vote is just one of a million things that you can do as part of building community. And I definitely love the whole idea of keep, not having to, keep being able to organize and do your work after the election. None of this sort of like, okay, the election's over, lay everybody off, and then we're gonna lose all this institutional knowledge. We're gonna lose all these connections we've made with voters. We're gonna lose all this great work that we've done, and it's just all gone. So I love that you're doing that. Jayne, one last question. I think, we have time for one last question. You weren't in Arizona at the beginning of the cycle, right? You were in DC. I think you were working for Emily's List. Do you regret moving to Arizona? And I think I know the answer, but I'll let you go ahead and answer it.
No, absolutely not. I mean, if anything, they were really supportive and they understood. When COVID started hitting our communities really hard, I was like this. I was like, oh my God, what do I do? And it hit me hard. And I said, I have to figure out something to go back home and to still hopefully have a living. And it was just one of the best things I ever did. And it was my Navajo leaders and mentors that reached out to me that said, hey, we know you've done all these great things out in the world. We need you to do them at home. And I said, of course, yes. And we started up right away. So it was mentors that really gave me a solid place to land. I mean, I made a pit stop over with Illuminated when I came over, but it really was something I've been longing to do for a long time. Ever since I graduated from Harvard Kennedy School and Marshall Gantz and his classes, I was like, I need to bring this home. I've been doing it everywhere else, but not home, and as much as I should. And so that's really what happened. And so now really it's taking that energy, as you said, to the next steps now of, okay, we went through the election, but now also the real work will then begin, because it comes to local organizing efforts of Dems Give Back, Dems finding local solutions and holding leaders accountable and being a voice in these policy pieces. Because one thing that we've heard was like, I care about education. What are we going to do? We need more healthcare services for our Indian health clinics, what we've seen in COVID. How do we do that? And we need help with policing and fire, all of the things to make our communities run. People are seeing that, and they're seeing the connection more and more from what they do as local organizing to the policy. And that's what I think the gap misses, because sometimes it turns into the candidate somehow. And it's like, okay, that's true. That's a really big, important piece because they can help move it along. But it's also the people themselves that really have to be that voice to the candidate and the party or other groups or whoever they're working through to make it happen. And so that's where we want to continue to build and strengthen that local grassroots place, because it's time. We just can't be coming in anymore at the last minute and then help us win an election and no one's left after. We're done. And not just our community, Black community, Latino community, we all feel this way. And so I think with us now at the helm and we have a platform and hey, pay attention to tribes, we need to leverage that more and let people know how we feel. And so it's exciting.
The National Party, I think, has never been more aware that they're going to have to they need to keep some of these states, particularly Arizona and Georgia, that flipped this year. And, hopefully they're
planning for the Senate seat and the governor's seat and the counties. And we're like, right. Let's do this.
Yes. Jayne, thank you so much for joining us. I'm inspired by your work. I'm going to do a little fundraising push for your organization. So see if we can help you a little bit out moving into this new year, because I love the work you're doing. I want to see you continue doing that work and that of your amazing organizers. So thank you so much.
That's how we say thank you in Navajo. We appreciate it so much. Our whole team, myself, Ms. Foy, who's the chair, going to be the new chair of Navajo County Democrats, who I work closely with, Eric Kramer, all of our 30 plus organizers. This is our team, and we're going to continue to work with everybody else. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Woo!
Wow. That was, I had a little tear. I was holding it back.
Thank you.
But that was, they're doing the gritty work there. The more we talk about this stuff and to these, to people who are working with the groups and whatever, the more I think what an untapped opportunity it is to, the work she was talking about in terms of the civic engagement, right? And the basic things of like getting healthcare supplies to people and getting food to people and getting propane to people so they can stay warm and things like that. Like, this is if Democratic groups were doing, civic engagement like this, when it comes time to vote, people are going to be very, very committed to the people who have been, there and on the ground doing the work. It just seems like there's such an untapped opportunity here for Democrats to engage in a new way at the local level, especially with, with a number of these groups that have sprung up that have done the hard work.
And when you're looking at the millions of dollars that were raised and spent, and a lot of it just wasted. I mean, just flat out wasted on TV ads that really don't move the needle. It was actually pissing me off at the end of the election cycle when campaigns were still asking for money so they could run more TV ads. I mean, it was actually getting a little gross, to be honest. When Jayne's organization with $450,000 had 22 volunteers help turn out the vote in a critical region of the state, helped deliver the margin of victory. It was part of a coalition, right? No one person, but was part of the coalition that helped deliver that margin of victory. And we have a governor's race coming up in 2022 in Arizona. We obviously 2024 again. We have a couple competitive House districts. I mean, there's a lot happening in Arizona. And if we're to be successful as a party in Arizona and turn it blue, like I think it needs to be demographically, it's going to be with people like us investing in these organizations as opposed to in TV ads that build nothing.
Right.
So,
so speaking of groups.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Go ahead, introduce her.
No, you go ahead. You're
all right.
You've got something planned and ready to go, so I don't want to mess it up.
So our next guest is Lauren Floyd. She is a staff writer at Daily Kos. She is also a brand new mom. So I'm so excited. One, that you're back and you're healthy and everything's looking great, and also that you're in Georgia and paying attention to what's happening on the ground. So what is happening on the ground? First of all, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I'm always so ready to go.
Let's just appreciate that when a new mom has 20 minutes to spend, instead of spending it taking a nap, she's doing it with us. So I don't know how that goes, but it's not that far away. So anyway, yeah, thank you.
All three of us are in different phases of our parenthood. I'm thankfully past that. I'm getting more sleep these days, I think. But Again, thanks so much. So where in Georgia are you, first of all?
So I'm in South Fulton. I'm about, I would say, like 10 minutes south of the airport here.
Okay, and so you are sort of in like almost ground zero of the core Democratic base, and the vote, sort of the source of most of the votes that delivered the victory for Joe Biden here these last few weeks ago. So what are you seeing in Fulton, in your little corner of the world, or in the state in general, as you write about it? What are you seeing there as we plan and organize for the January Senate runoffs?
Okay. So one of the things, and I've been really targeting in on young voters, right? And organizations that are
Kerry was talking.
And because that's such an important demographic is getting that 18 to 34 age range. And so I've been speaking with a couple of organizations that are specifically targeting the more than 23,000 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the time of the January runoff. And so they'll be first-time voters.
Wait, 23,000 that turn 18 between election day in just the 3 months.
Those are the Georgians that could potentially register.
Remember, Biden only won by 10,000 votes.
Exactly, about 12,000. Yeah.
Reverend Warnock, who's one of the candidates there. You guys know that. That's just. By the way, newsflash. For any viewers who are not familiar with Reverend Warnock, Raphael Warnock is one of the Democratic candidates there. But he just recently did a TikTok video where he was targeting that exact demographic and literally said, if you're turning 18 before January 5th or on the day of, request your absentee ballot. So he's on the TikTok medium, the
youths are using. We're going to sound really old here.
That's what I hear. The youths are on the TikTok. So anyway, but so it was
exactly that's for a reason, because they could mean the difference in Georgia. And so a couple of the things that some of these organizations I talked to are doing, one of them, Students for 2020, one of the things that they did was in the presidential election was develop a dashboard on their website that would not only help educate college students about registering to vote, but it would actually allow them to put their home address and then their college address and find out where it made most sense for them to vote, where their vote would matter most.
Georgia.
Right.
Is that the only answer? Is that the only answer?
And so they did that, and that they were able to register 65,000 people.
No way.
And this is from college groups dropping their website into group chats and into email threads. And so you're seeing some of these other organizations really target virtual, going after people virtually. It's especially when you're talking about that 18 to 34 and that 17 turning 18, you got to hit them virtually where they are. And so that's what they're doing. That's what I talked to a fellow with the Campus Vote Project Democracy, and she attends Clark Atlanta University. So she was looking at numbers, determining gaps between registration and turnout rates, and kind of determining a plan for how they're going to register people and get people to the polls. And one of the things that she mentioned was directly emailing every student those deadlines.
They still do email?
Yeah, yes, definitely still doing it, especially if you're in school. Those college emails.
Got it.
And so they're doing that. They're hitting their social media networks. And one of the other things that they're doing is targeting their friend groups and asking other Democrats to target their friend groups, and to really, and this is back to Students for 2020. They're asking them to be kind of captains and either be responsible for getting 5 to 10 people to register, 5 to 10 people out, to vote. And so they're reaching young people virtually, sitting in on some of their classes that are happening virtually and dropping a link to register, right? Giving them 2 minutes to actually do it while they're sitting in class. That's another strategy that Students for 2020 is incorporating into their push to get those young voters. So they're really working with email threads. They're working with, individual people. They're sitting down with Republican student groups too, and spending 45 minutes to an hour talking to them about not why they should change their beliefs, but why our candidates are more fitting with their beliefs. And so they're really
also persuasion too.
Yeah. I talked to one student with Students for 2020, and he's like, I'm reaching out to this Columbia University poli-sci professor about how to have that conversation, because it's nuanced and it can go left. And so you got to kind of proceed with caution when you're talking to somebody that might not necessarily share your beliefs.
Yeah.
Right.
Lauren, earlier in the show, and I'm not sure, you may not have heard this, but I was quoting an analysis from Circle that was saying that in Georgia, there was an estimated 188,000 more young voters that backed Biden than backed Trump. And, obviously we know that the margin of Biden's win was much slimmer than that. So you could literally, look at that demographic and say that provided the margin of victory, right? And I just wonder, how are people approaching, because you're talking about getting people registered and this whole mobilization, but what kind of messages are they pounding home about how important it is now that Biden has won the state and we have President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris? What's the motivation to get people, the young voters, out again in January for the Senate, which we all know is super important, but I think to a lot of voters can seem kind of obscure. Like, well, we got the guy in the White House. What else do we need to do? I just wonder what you're getting in terms of the message they're impressing upon these young voters for why they need to return to the polls or get out there for the first time if they are just turning 18 now. Exactly.
And that's another key priority that some of these organizations are focusing in on, is telling them, it's one thing to vote for the president, but you can't vote for the president and the president's hands are tied because he can't do anything with the Senate. And so pushing home that message of how important this is. Georgia has really, a lot of these organizations have really been focusing in on that. And as a part of their overall strategy in getting voters to turn out, they're also talking about why it's important for them to turn out. And so I think one of the students I talked to, he put it in words that I thought were really, really wise. And he said, people think that young voters are apathetic and that they don't care. And that's not true. But really it's that young voters are disillusioned. They're disappointed. They've been let down time and time again by the system. And so now they're at this place where, they're coming from Trump as president. I don't want to say
I would be disillusioned.
Yeah, right.
But that in lies part of the problem in the runoff is that, it's not that in your face extreme of, Trump, oh, we got to get him out. I think a lot of young voters felt that we got to get him out. Like he is an obvious racist. Like he isn't, like, we got to vote. We can't, and it was easier for some to vote because they could vote by mail now in a way that was, they might not have been knowledgeable about how to cast an absentee ballot or do any of that, but it was a lot easier for you this time around. And so yes, that in lies part of that problem of making the runoffs but a lot of it comes down to education, right? Because Loeffler and Purdue, they're no saints, and just because they may have more political savviness than to necessarily call groups of people thugs, they're still doing some pretty harmful things. And so a lot of it is just getting that message out there and talking to young voters.
How do you have a sense of just how motivating or not our two Democratic candidates are? I mean, we have Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff. Warnock was is the head pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. This was, I think I got that name right. I hope I did. Martin Luther King's church. I mean, he was like, if I could pick anybody to win on day one of the cycle, that was who I picked, right? So I'm excited he made the runoff, and I'm excited he's this close to closing the deal. I think he's going to be amazing in the Senate. He's the kind of person that could be the conscience of the Senate in a way that I actually think we're lacking right now. And John Ossoff, who's young, seemingly dynamic, but I'm looking at it from the outside. Do you have any sense of how these communities, these younger voters, see those candidates?
Yeah, well, specifically with Students for 2020, their one of their long-term goals is to make government more representative of young people. And they were explaining to me that they want to see young people representing young people, and speaking to the issues that they care about, like college affordability. And student loans. Like, there are certain messages that resonate with young voters regardless of party. And so that's one of the things that they are really zeroing in on is some of those things, and kind of how they went about, when they're having these conversations with Republicans, those are some of the things they would say. And so, yes, that's kind of a little bit about that specific organization and how they're doing it.
So do you think are Ossoff and Warnock, are they speaking to those issues? Do you get the sense that they have a lot of good material to work with?
Oh, definitely. Okay. Yes.
Cool. Kerry?
Well, so you just started to touch on this, but that was a Facebook question that we got is, are there specific issues that are resonating with young voters? And you what you're saying is that college affordability, student loans. What specifically about student loans? I know for people, obviously for people who are, if you're in this 18 to 29-year-old crowd, some of them in the older part of that group of people are already carrying around a lot of debt. So the idea that Joe Biden might be able to, slash right off the bat 50,000 of it if he so chooses to do is kind of amazing. But what other, like, how does that manifest in a platform for John Ossoff, for instance, or Raphael Warnock? I mean, do they have a specific piece of legislation or plan that they're pushing that would also help with college affordability?
Yes, I know Ossoff does specifically. Because I looked at his effort to make college more affordable for young. Well, not more affordable. His effort to have student loan forgiveness, and both candidates are very passionate about getting to a place where college is those loans are being repaid, and because here's the big picture. A lot of these students are graduating and having to live with huge amount of debt, and also work and survive. And so you want to talk about the disproportionate home ownerships affecting minorities and affecting people of color. All of that is related to the cost of college and having to take on the cost of college when you don't have a parent that could necessarily write a check for you to attend school. And so that's a huge issue for young voters is being able to go to school, get the credentials that are required for you to have the job, and then figure out how you're going to do the job also. And so it's layered, and both candidates speak to that.
So Lauren, thank you so very much. We are out of time, but it's a pleasure. I'm hoping we can check in with you before the election itself, and maybe get another check-in on what's happening, what you're hearing, what what activists on the ground are doing. This has been an actually fascinating show, seeing the different ways that people are organizing and mobilizing for these critical elections. So Lauren, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
It really is just fascinating seeing almost two different approaches of organizing. And you have to really, it just shows how you have to tailor to specific communities, right? I mean, you're talking about young voters in Georgia. They're not looking for help, moving hay at their farm, right? In Arizona, on the other hand, it's a spread out community with very little internet access. Despite COVID, they had to find ways to organize old school way, like in person, right? So
right.
I love the innovation and the nimbleness of these groups that are sort of on the ground, doing what they need to do to reach the communities they need to reach.
Right. I mean, it just goes to show you that the cookie cutter approach just, is just useless in some ways, depending on what, these different groups of folks are the challenges they face in their particular situation, whatever it might be, and what their needs are, and and how to address those needs. I'm struck every time. I'm struck also having talked to Kara last week, who was talking about the youth vote and being young herself, and about what a horrible choice our country has faced these kids with, who unless they're part of a really privileged background, they have a situation where their mom and dad or whoever can pay for their education, then there's no good choice, right? I mean, you can't, if you want to have opportunities going forward, you can't just forgo going to college or potentially going to graduate school or whatever, sort of training you need to do. And as a country, we shouldn't want anyone to be, pulling back from doing that, because that's part of what continues our innovation and continues to grow our economy and all that stuff, right? But at the same time, they all know that they're going to come out with just this enormous amount of debt. And this is something. I mean, this is actually somewhat of a personal issue for me too. I mean, something that my family deals with. But there's no good choice, and you basically you have to get the education if you want to have the opportunities, but then you're just completely hamstrung moving forward. I mean, that's just it's just something that our government has to address quickly, to find ways of addressing that, because it's not good for the country, it's not good for the citizens, it's not good for the economy. There's just nothing good about it that we're
Kerry, what you're seeing,
barriers.
Yeah, you have the cost of living is so incredibly expensive in the cities, which is where everybody wants to be, but you need an education, but the education is too expensive and it's too unattainable. And you create these sort of walled gardens that are breeding the right-wing populism that is actually fueling Donald Trump. And the problem right now isn't Donald Trump. We kind of solved that one for now. The problem is the next one, who's going to be smarter and won't blab about his dastardly evil plans to steal the election in Pennsylvania 2 months before the election, so we could be prepared, and actually doesn't do things like install a director of Homeland Security who is illegal, so all the regulations that he passed are invalid, right? I mean, we got lucky that our first right-wing populist was as stupid as Donald Trump, and he still came close to winning twice, right?
Yeah, we effectively dodged a bullet.
And so by making education that much more difficult, and not to mention you graduate, and what jobs are there right now, right? I mean, we're in the middle of a freaking recession because of this pandemic, and it really creates that environment for the next Donald Trump, the smarter, more dangerous threat to our democracy. So we need to be able to address these issues, and we don't have time to waste. I know everything's we need to deal with it now, right? The climate change, but I'm worried about that next Donald Trump, and this education piece really is a component to helping avoid that in the future.
Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. It is one way, because so often I look at what's going on with the right wing and how many people are caught up with these conspiracy theories and going down that QAnon rabbit hole. And you think, just how could 47% of this nation, or whatever, it was approximately what it was, vote for Donald Trump again? Get 4 years of this guy and say, yep, he's my dude, and like get back on it. Like, that's crazy. And so it sometimes seems insurmountable, but this education piece and making education more attainable and getting people, once people get more educated, they develop more critical thinking skills. They don't rely on a singular outlet for, their information or whatever. That is a part of starting to unravel the environment where these conspiracy theories can just breed and just, get oxygen and get out of control. Because God knows we can't depend on Facebook and the social media companies to like police themselves. I mean, that's another thing. But anyway.
So, Kerry, that's all the time we have this week. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Make sure you subscribe to Daily Coast. Thank you to Walter Einenkel for producing the show. I never give him the thanks, and he does so much work.
Walter!
Wear a mask. Be safe. Thanksgiving, do what you can to be safe. It is dangerous out there. Lots of people dying. Lots of people getting infected. It's serious. Please do what you can to keep you and yours safe. So thank you to Jayne Parish for joining us. I'm so inspired by the work she's doing. Lauren Floyd, who could have taken a nap, instead joined us to talk about Georgia. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for joining us. See you next week, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, or subscribe to the Daily Coast YouTube channel and catch us there. Thank you so much.